My name is Eloise Yard and I am presenting today's talk on making invisibility visible. I just wanted to provide a little bit of introduction on who I am, why I'm talking about this, and how I think it's relevant, I guess. So a little bit of background about myself. I'm currently the programme lead for the Speak Out podcast, or Speak Out Revolution. Before this role, I've done various voluntary roles for various companies. I think voluntary work and charity work is very important. And the bonus for me about voluntary work and charity work is it's much more amenable and flexible than a lot of paid employment, which I'll obviously get into later in this talk. Before that, I worked for the ambulance service. I was a 999 emergency call taker. And before that, I just sort of worked in the service industry in my early to mid-teens. I'm speaking about this subject in particular today because I'm very passionate about it due to the fact that I have learned to live with and I've learned to adapt to living with invisible disability over the last 6 years or so. Therefore, inclusivity in the workplace, people with disabilities is very important to me due to the fact, in my experience, there's just not a lot of it. It's not particularly inclusive. So, a little bit of a sort of pre-accident how I got to this point thing. I'm just actually no, I'm going to give you a little disclaimer first. As a result of my disability, there is the possibility that the odd swear word may pop out in this conversation. I'm trying really hard to control it, but as a result of one of my brain injury deficits, there is the possibility that I may swear ever so slightly. I don't mean to offend anyone, but it's not something I do have control over it, but it occasionally just happens, and I don't intend it to, but it might slip out, so hopefully you're not easily offended. So before my accident, I worked for the ambulance service. I really loved my job. It was very challenging. I worked a lot of 12-hour shifts, and obviously it is a challenging job role in general, dealing with people and dealing with patients in one of the worst times of their lives. But I really enjoyed it. It was really fulfilling, and I loved it. Unfortunately, in December, 6 years ago, I got involved in a really bad RTA on my way to work. So this resulted in me having a severe traumatic brain injury. I was in surgery, I think, for about 4 or 5 hours or so. I had a lot of internal injuries. I had to have an emergency splenectomy because my spleen shattered, unfortunately. I was placed into an induced coma for about 2 weeks. This was all when I was 19 years old. So what this has left me with now, sort of like in the present day, I deal with migraines, really bad headaches. I do have a sort of almost chronic fatigue problem. I get vertigo, tinnitus. I'm deaf in my left ear. Like I said earlier with the disclaimer, I struggle with something called disinhibition and impulsivity. So I've done a huge amount of work through neuro rehab and neuropsychology to control this. And to a large extent I can. It's much better than it was. So this means that if I think something, I say it, and if I want to do something, I'll do it. It doesn't happen now, or it happens very rarely, and I know it's going to happen. So I know if I'm really, really tired and I'm struggling, I know it's probably likely. So I reduce my social circle and I don't do anything too major, and I won't go on Amazon or other shopping websites because I know I'll probably buy something that I don't really intend to. So that's those are two of the biggest deficits I'm left with. They had the biggest effect on me for a while post-accident because you just couldn't have a conversation with me without me swearing constantly, and if I thought it, I just said it. I had no filter at all. So I'm also left with dual attention difficulties. They're a lot better than they were, but back in the day, which sounds much further than 6 years ago, back in the day I couldn't concentrate on two things at once at all. I would repeat myself a lot, and I would forget if I'd done anything, which I will go on to in a bit when I tell you the story of me making cold tea for literally everyone who came to see me. I get a lot of frequent infections as a result of my splenectomy, and I do have a handy tendency to blood clots. So yeah, obviously I had a lot of visitors. The problem with this was I couldn't really remember if I turned the kettle on or not. I think I had. I'd be like, yeah, kettle's boiled, it's brilliant. Kettle actually boiled about 45 minutes ago. And my common sense was a bit so-so. So I didn't sort of go, oh, that water's not steaming, it's clearly not hot, let's turn it on again. Instead, I handed people multiple cups of cold tea, cold water, cold milk, standard tea bag. That was me initially post-accident. I probably had PTA for about 6 months. Nowadays, I'm sort of left with quite chronic fatigue problems, which tend to mean that I really struggle with roles in an office, particularly if it's on a full-time basis, because I can't pace myself properly. My splenectomy means I get a lot of infections. Touch wood, not this year, because I've been in shielding for about 6 months, so I haven't seen enough people to get infections. I have vertigo as well, which isn't particularly fun. Leaves me feeling like I'm on a really crappy cruise ship for about 3-4 months at a time. And whilst I do struggle with controlling my disinhibition and impulsivity now, I can filter it, but obviously it's very exhausting because where everybody else has conversations normally, and you don't think about filtering your conversation with most people. I have to consciously think about it. So I really restrict my social group on days when I'm really tired, because that's when I slip. So you have to kind of know me fairly well to not be offended by the things that I say. One of the things I find really difficult is when employers seem to assume that I'm not doing something purely because I'm lazy. And it's not just employers, it's regular able-bodied lay people as well. They have a really bad habit of assuming that the reason I'm not doing that thing and that's in that time frame is just because I can't be asked. And it honestly couldn't be further from the truth. So there's something quite well known in brain injury circles and chronic fatigue circles, which is called the boom and bust cycle, which is basically where when you feel kind of decent, you go, oh, I've got all these jobs left to do from the other day when I didn't feel any good, but I'll feel okay today, so I'll get them all done today. The problem with getting them all done on that one day when you feel good is then you have about a week to recover from all that you've done. So you boom and then you bust. Also, the spoon theory is quite a good explanation of it. So everybody has a certain amount of spoons per day. So say you wake up with like 15 spoons. If you have a bad night's sleep, or you're ill, or you're hungry, you have less spoons anyway. And different tasks take different amount of spoons. So you have to deliberately allot what you're going to do in the day. So some days I can make an extravagant 3-course meal and bake bread, brilliant. And then some days I'll have to eat pizza for dinner because I cannot stand up for long enough to actually make something in the kitchen. I think one of the biggest things that's really big for me is that employers and sort of lay people and body people don't make assumptions, because it's really hurtful the amount of assumptions that have been made about me and to me without ever asking me what I actually need. People have a really bad habit of assuming I can't remember anything they're saying, so they talk to me in really short sentences with very little words, which is deeply frustrating. I'm not actually a toddler. So that's extremely difficult and frustrating when I have to control my need to swear at them, because that's very irritating. It's really disheartening when people tend to assume that they know more about how my disability affects me than I do. One of the biggest things that bugs me that I've had from actually people that I've worked for, people I've worked with, and just regular people in the street who kind of know me. My favourite one is either, you don't look sick, or, are you sure you're sick? Number one, I don't look sick because eyeliner is a very magical piece of makeup and it makes a big difference to my face. If you saw me without it, you'd be like, yeah, no, she's on death's door. And I'm definitely sure I'm sick because I'm not going to get cured anytime soon because it's incurable. I haven't got a cold, I haven't got the flu, I've got a traumatic brain injury that's not going to, it'll get better, I'll be able to deal with the side effects, but it's never going to be cured. I'm always going to have it as a thing to deal with. So that tends to affect me in multiple ways of the workplace, in that it affects me at the very beginning. So I honestly avoid applying for jobs now because I've had really bad experiences in the past. I've attended interviews where they clearly weren't interested in me as a person. Sometimes I've attended interviews and I feel like they've clearly only interviewed me because I may have disclosed my disability and they feel that they need to. And I've attended interviews where they just seem a bit irritated that somebody who occasionally has physical or medical restrictions that require a small workaround would dare to apply for this job role, because this job role clearly can't do that. You can't do that. And it's particularly frustrating and difficult during this pandemic, where there's been so much home working and remote working to adapt to the pandemic and social distancing, that I've been repeatedly told that it's not possible for the last 6 years that I've been trying to work. I've been repeatedly told that home working and remote working is impossible. You've got to stay in an office 8 hours a day. That's just a fact of it. And if I wasn't in an office 8 hours a day and I could be more flexible and home-based, I could produce better work and not be miserable. Because it's an immediate disqualifier when you advertise roles as full-time, 37.5-hour-a-week roles that require me to be fully office-based. It's an immediate disqualifier for me, and it's an immediate disqualifier for a lot of people with invisible disabilities and chronic illnesses, because it's just not feasible to expect somebody to be able to manage 37.5 hours a week full-time in an office. They might be able to do 37.5 hours a week at home, but they might well not be able to do it, because by the time you've driven to the office and you've sat yourself down and you've had a name conversation with your desk mate, you're knackered. You can't then do any more work. I think the biggest thing for me that's I think is really important is people understanding that you can't just be inclusive to visible disabilities and assume that you're done. So having a lift and a disabled toilet doesn't mean you're done and you're inclusive. Disabilities and chronic illnesses come in many forms, and the symptoms can vary in intensity depending on multiple external factors. So somebody who can normally walk without a problem at all, and you see them every day and they have a nice chat to you, and you see them be able to walk into the kitchen and make their cup of tea, they might wake up the next day and really struggle to perform basic self-care or basic household tasks because they happen to have a cold or they happen to have burnt themselves out of it. We really need to stop with the assumption that the quantity of work someone produces is more important than the quality. I'd rather produce higher quality work that's taken more effort and thought because I've had the energy to do it, than be able to say, yeah, I've definitely put in 8 hours, but it's not very good because I was checked out for about 6 of those 8 hours because I'm knackered. I think the important thing for employers to offer to try and be more inclusive to people with invisible disabilities is the ability to actually have a truly flexible role that offers the chance of remote working, and it doesn't put someone off at the very outset. It's not good enough to say full-time role, 37.5 hours a week, but we offer flexible working, because then when you message them to say, what do you mean by flexible working? They say, well, once you're fully trained in about 6 months to a year's time, we could possibly consider it. By the time I get to the 6 months time point, I'm probably in hospital because I've massively burnt myself out because I spent 6 months working solidly. So I think disabled people are very often very good at knowing their own limits energy-wise. If you actually allow an employee to put that skill to good use, you're going to have far happier employees. I know that if I've got a really busy day where I have to use a lot of energy, I need to have a really quiet day the day afterwards. So I probably won't do a lot tomorrow because I've been talking to you lot, and I'm probably going to be knackered. It's really hard to explain to some employers that my performance varies with my symptoms and my energy. And if I just get given the space to manage that, I'll be a much happier employee who achieves much more on a day-to-day basis. So sort of what people can really do to make this inclusive is to offer flexible and remote working in a way that employees can actually action it. So do it in the job description itself. Don't offer it, and like I said, don't offer it and have so many caveats in place it's not actually actionable, because that's just deeply frustrating. Life's hard enough living with a disability, a chronic illness or an invisible disability, without work being made even more difficult for us. Actually make an attempt to understand that not all disabilities are visible. I've had lots of people kind of go, oh yeah, I understand not all disabilities are visible, it's fine. But then they go, what do you mean you're sick? You look fine, why can't you come into work? I'm like, because I'm lying in bed unable to move. I'm not making it up, I'm not lying. I actually really am this sick. I can't sound brain injured over the phone to you like people do when they fake a cold. You're just going to have to accept it. I'm not lying. So just speak to the person with the lived experience, because they're always going to know how it affects them better than you are at the end of the day. The person who lives with it on a day-to-day basis is going to know more about how it affects them and what they need to make their workplace inclusive and diverse and somewhere they can genuinely put in their best work. Just speak to them. You know, we're not aliens. I mean, I'm a bit odd, but I'm not actually an alien. So if you speak to me, I'm more than happy to speak to anyone about my disability, how it affects me, and I'll ramble on for hours. It really annoys some people, but I'm quite happy to do that. So somebody just took 5 minutes to say, Eloise, what would make work much better for you? What would make you a happier employee? How can you work at your best? I'd be so happy, because to be honest, it's never ever happened. And just kind of try and educate yourself. I wish more people would make a genuine attempt to actually understand my invisible disability and how it affects me by reading Visible Disability or Disability Visibility by Alice Wong is really good. I recommend it. I've been reading it recently. Speak to employees, actually advocate for change, and never say, you don't look sick today, are you sure you're sick? I think you can do something, you look fine. Because like I said, makeup is really quite magic, and the fact I look healthy doesn't translate the same as to what my internal organs or the rest of me is doing. So for example, right now I have something called costochondritis, which means that the cartilage between my rib and my breastbone is deeply inflamed, and I've been having chest pain and struggling to breathe for about the last week. But you wouldn't know it, because I'm very good at pretending I'm healthy and able-bodied. So don't assume that you know somebody better than they know themselves. So sort of thank you all for listening. And the question I sort of asked you is, what will you do to change the dichotomy between visible disability and invisible disability and chronic illness in the workplace? All disabilities are valid, whether you personally see and understand them or not. Just because you can't see somebody's disability doesn't mean it's not just as valid as the disability you can see. Someone in a wheelchair's disability is just as valid as someone with Crohn's or chronic fatigue or a brain injury, etc. Don't assume you know better than the person with the lived experience. Ask, learn, just do better. It sounds quite self-explanatory, but just do better. Yeah. So that's everything from me for now. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Eloise, for taking us through your experiences. I think you mentioned quite a few points about the need to have all of these conversations with your employees that may be suffering from these invisible disabilities, that it's important because they're the ones that will really understand what they're going through and how best to be productive. I think it's important that people take those things on board, that it's not really about your assumption. It's about the individual and what you can do if you're really saying that you want to be a truly diverse and inclusive workplace. So I realized I forgot to introduce myself earlier. My name is Wami. I'm the coordinator for the Speak Up Talks. So I'll be going to take the Q&A now. I'll just go first to the comments because I can see some people have typed some things in. I think Kerry is still on the call, Kerry Bonnell. I can see a comment that was made from her, and then a question was asked at the end. Kerry, would you be able to read out your question so that we can see if Eloise would be able to take it for you? Kerry, are you still on the call? Okay, I'll just go ahead and read it for now. I agree with outputs rather than hours. How do you think employers can change or can be influenced to change to recognize the additional skills and strengths people with invisibilities have as a result of managing their disability, which are a plus for their business?
I think it's a lot about actually having a conversation. Like I said before, it's a lot about actually having a conversation with your employees. And it's really important that you have a conversation with them, and also that when somebody turns up to an interview, you don't immediately discount them just because they say they have a disability, because that's happened to me on more occasions than I really care to count. And a lot of the time, disabled employees, I think personally, obviously I'm going to say this because I am one, I think they bring something different to the table because they've gotten really good at managing this disability for so many years. So actually they've got a whole different range of skills to bring to the table that an able-bodied person might not have, as long as you are willing to try and work around it and focus on the quality of their work rather than the quantity of it.
Okay. We also have a question from I'm just going through the Q&A for now, unless anybody would like to jump in with the question, but I'll go through the Q&A now. There's a question here from Manish Tayal. Oh, you know, that's nice. Okay, would you like to go ahead and ask your question yourself, or I'll go ahead and read it out? Would you like to go ahead?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, brilliant. Hi, Eloise. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah. Thanks very much for this. I'm afraid I joined slightly late. I was picking up my son. Sorry, but managed to catch most of it. And I especially liked the I can't sound brain injured over the phone. Absolute genius. But it is so relatable for so many of us, isn't it? What I wanted to ask you is, it's brilliant that you and many others are increasingly happy to speak about their condition and explain it, as you said, right? But not everyone wants to do that in public, and nor should they have to. So what's your advice on how to change the cultures around them to be more accepting of individual needs, even if you don't understand them or where they're coming from?
I think a lot of it, for me, a lot of it started with kind of, so the way I talk about it now, I've always been quite bullshit. I will admit that being hit by a car made me a lot bullshit than I am normally. So I've never been particularly shy about talking about how I dislike things. But back when I was first injured, I would have been much shyer to talk out about things that offended me and that upset me at work, because microaggressions were a really big thing with disability. And with brain injury, there's always this, what really hurt me was the assumption that I couldn't remember anything and I was a bit of an idiot and they'd have to talk to me really slowly. And that for me was one of the most frustrating things. So I think it's really important that people educate themselves and make an attempt to actually, even if you can't completely understand something, make an attempt to empathize. Don't just sort of go, well, I've read this, and don't compare someone to somebody else. I've been compared to somebody else with a brain injury before who's recovered completely better than I have. But they're completely different things. Brain injuries are all so different, and the way that you have them is very different. So don't assume because you know someone with a concussion who's gone back to work 2 days later that somebody else who's been hit by a car is being slow by taking a year. So I think it's really important that people are more careful about what they say, and certain terminology that is used in able-bodied society is actually really hurtful as a disabled person. Personally, and I hope I don't offend anyone, it really bothers me how much spaz is used in conversation, because it's just derogatory and unnecessary, and it is hurtful. And I've been called that by numerous people in the past. So I think it's really important people think more about what they say and how they say it.
Yeah, thanks for that. Completely agree. And I guess the three key things there were education, empathy, and not making assumptions. So yeah, I really like that. Thanks very much.
They seem to be things people struggle with, sadly, which is quite upsetting.
Yeah, I think those are things that we could all personally take on, apart from just trying to implement it in our workplaces. We could take it personally on ourselves. Okay, the next question I can see is from Marie. Marie, are you still on the call? Would you like to read out your question, or should I go ahead and do it for you?
Hi, Whammy. Yes, I am on the call. I'm just scrolling through to see which one of the questions I asked. Okay. Eloise, so you mentioned some details in job descriptions which really, which act as like a hard barrier and completely deter you from applying, even in the first instance, right? So we're like I see the challenges that employers are potentially pre-filtering great candidates just based on some things that they have in their descriptions, and they don't even know it. Like, they can't see that they're doing that. And so what I really wanted to understand is, like, what can companies do? Of course, you can only speak on behalf of yourself, but there may be, it may apply to others who have invisible disabilities as well. What can companies do at the point of, putting out role descriptions that mean that they remove those barriers for someone like you applying?
I think personally, the things that always really put me off applying to things is everything seems to necessitate full-time office-based working, which immediately puts me off. If there's no capacity to be amenable and flexible in the job advert, there's no way they're going to want to hire me and then do it once I'm employed. So I will immediately not even go to try and apply, because I have been burnt before by applications that say flexible working can be discussed. And what they actually mean by that is, in a year's time, when you're a valued employee and you've done your training and you're useful to us, then we can think about it. But by that point, I've probably left, because it's not sustainable for me as a person. So I think it's really important to be just genuinely more inclusive, like offer flexible working and offer remote working in a way that is actually possible to put into practice.
So if I've understood that correctly, almost at the point that a role description goes out, the default should be flexible working is available and open for discussion by default, rather than 8 hours 40. But we can talk about flexible working if that's an option. Yeah,
definitely, because if that's the default, I know that actually discussing flexible working isn't going to be that easy, and it's not going to be something they're particularly conducive to listening about.
So I guess based on what you've said, my request to everyone on this that would like to be more inclusive as an employer on this call is to, out of interest, go back, look at your role descriptions and see whether or not there's anything in there that would deter someone like Eloise from applying. Because we can't be truly inclusive if we're already pre-filtering people out that have invisible disabilities. Thanks, Eloise.
No problem.
Thanks, Marie. I can see some very interesting comments from Jamie Saunders. There's a comment here about the NHS having a good document called Language Matters, and we've also included a link. Jamie, I wonder if you can share some more information to just give us an overview about this document and Language Matters, and how we could maybe use it in our different sectors. Are you still on the call?
I think Jamie may have just left, unfortunately.
Oh, okay, that's a shame. But Jamie has, if you are interested in learning about this document, you can actually click on the link. He's put it in the Q&A, or I can share it after this talk is over, so that we can use it for our own reference.
I do recommend, if you're interested in reading any documentation about brain injuries, Headway UK provides a lot of interesting, relevant documentation.
Okay, I can see another question from Manish Kayal about what can the organization do to reassure people that, let me read out the whole comment, sorry. As a military doctor, I speak with a number of people who are very reluctant for me to refer them for further exploration and potential diagnosis and additional advice or help, because of the fear of whether or not it is justified that this will damage their career prospects. What can the organization do to reassure people that this is not the case, and make sure that those who are diagnosed with whatever disability or whatever condition are actually properly supported?
That's a really good question. It's something I've experienced myself. So I've probably only started referring to myself as actually disabled and proudly being disabled in the last year. It's probably taken me about 5.5 to 6 years since my accident to be like, no, I'm okay with this. And the bit that always offends me is people who say things like, oh, you're too defined by your disability. And I'm like, well, yeah, I am, because it's a huge part of my personhood. A lot of the things I do and can't do are affected by it. So I'm not ashamed of admitting that I have one. I don't kind of know what the best thing to do is to kind of reassure people that it's not, because I think the best way to reassure people it's not the case is for the employers to in the first place not make it a problem, because that's the real problem, is that people don't want to get advice and help on their conditions. They don't want to be labelled with a condition because a condition is seen as a label, and that's seen as a really big weird thing you shouldn't admit to. Because I know with my list of medical conditions, I've been some places and they'll look at it and be like, oh, really, you're buggered, to be honest. I'm like, I know, I'm fine with it. But I think it's really important, I think, that workplaces are genuinely inclusive, and that maybe they put it in somewhere that they will take information on your conditions, but it's more for their records and to make sure they are being inclusive and providing you with what you need, and it in no way limits your ability to get the job role. I think it's very important that it's really clear that if you declare your disability or your chronic illness, you are not going to be held back from getting this job, and an able-bodied person isn't going to be given it just because they happen to be able-bodied. I hope that got to the right point.
Yes, I think you covered quite a lot in that. And a lot of people are now making comments about how they do think that the job descriptions is something that should be looked at, that it has a way of adding unnecessary skills and various other things. So I think they found your response helpful.
I completely agree with the driving license bit, actually, that David posted, because I'm lucky enough I got my driving license a few years ago. I have a medical driving license, the DVLA, which means I can only drive automatic. But I was lucky enough to actually manage to get it a few years ago. But until the point when I actually got a driving license, I had that was another nightmare job-wise, because I just couldn't apply for anything because I was like, no, you got a driving license. I was like, why? I can get there via public transport. I can get there via Lyft. There's no reason I have to have a car to get myself there and back. And it does stop. It stops a large group of able-bodied people, let alone disabled people, from applying for job roles if you insist on a driving license.
Okay, thanks for speaking on that. Does anybody else on the call have any other comments or any other questions they would like to ask Eloise, or generally? Oh, Jamie, I can see you're back on the call. Would you like to speak a little bit about Language Matters now?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's just a very brief one. So I'm connected to Diabetes UK through the Leeds Diabetes Group. And obviously, we're trying to make the connection then that we're not patients, first and foremost, we're citizens. And we are being encouraged to take care of our own care. And that means we've got to stop the professionals bossing us.
Yeah.
But that means you've got to be assertive enough and aware enough and supported enough to do that through the peer community. So through the Leeds Diabetes Group, which has virtually gone online over the last 7 months, we're trying to help people understand that language really does matter, and that there are friends on the inside of the NHS who've written things like Language Matters that gives us then the case and the argument to push back against pharmacists and nurses and doctors and employers that we're experts in our own care. And actually the NHS absolutely wants that, because they can't afford us to be patients every single day of the year anyway. So Language Matters, although it's specifically written around language and diabetes, and obviously the main differentiator there is between type 1, which is invisible and potentially chronic, and type 2, which has got stigma because people think it's just a lifestyle disease. It ties into all sorts of psychological and emotional co-conditions where you do need things like Language Matters to be in existence, so that then you can point back towards it and use it constructively with your employer, but also use it with your healthcare professionals, so that it just changes the nature of the relationship. We need an adult relationship, and at the moment they're the parent and they're telling the child what to do all the time. So that's my short piece, if that's all right.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, actually. And I agree with the need for support, because as a brain injured person, I'm quite lucky in a lot of ways in that I can fake it till I make it. Really, I'm quite lucky in that I can come across as fairly able-bodied, and as you probably know from hearing me chat away to you for about half an hour, language is not a problem that I have. But for a lot of people with brain injuries, language is a problem. And I remember when I first got injured, I really struggled to think of the right word. I just couldn't grasp the actual right term, which is very difficult when you're trying to explain your healthcare problems to a doctor or an employer or somebody else, because you just cannot find the right word, and then they talk for you, which is another thing I would say never do, is don't talk for someone, just wait. They're finding it difficult. They will get there. They will have a way to get there. Whether they write it, whether they type it, whether they sign it, they will have their own way to get to their point. Don't butt in and speak for them. They're not children. And it's annoying when we have children. So just don't do it. It's not very fun.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you, Eloise. Does anyone else have anything they would wish to ask or comment on this call whilst we're still here?
I think everybody's fed up hearing me talk now.
No, I'm sure they aren't. You've been just so informative that I feel that they just feel that they've gotten so much to reflect upon. Okay, so on that note,
Whammy, Susan Rooney has made a comment that I think is really interesting.
Okay, Susan, would you be willing to read out your comments and elaborate on it, or should I go ahead and read it out?
No, I can do that. Can you hear me okay?
Okay. Yes, I can.
Okay. To me, the big challenge for me is trying to convince companies to make the effort to hire people with disabilities, because it's more difficult than just hiring able-bodied or non-disabled. And for me, the view is if you can take someone who has a disability, even if they can only work part-time, aside from whether they're providing the quote unquote full value to the company, you're making them a productive member of society, which gives them better mental health, which keeps them out of the social, the whole need for mental health care. I mean, obviously we still do have some of that, but it keeps you as a productive member, which from a societal standpoint to me makes perfect sense. But there just feels like a huge wall in companies to go, oh, it's difficult. Like, why should I, when I can hire somebody who's perfectly able? I just wondered if you had any thoughts on how we break down that barrier.
I don't know, I have that many thoughts. I completely get it, and I've experienced that before. It's because people are just like, it's just a bit harder to hire a disabled person. It's a bit tougher, can't be bothered. And it is deeply frustrating as a disabled person to know that when I apply for things or go to interviews, they're clearly like, it's slightly more effort, and we can't really be asked to make it, which is very upsetting. And especially in a society that is so obsessed with what we do for a living, because I've met so many people over the last 6 years, and the first thing they do is go, what do you do? Where do you work? And back before I got this role, I was just doing volunteer work, or I used to say I was medically retired. And the looks I used to get from people, and they're like, you're young, why are you medically just being lazy? Which is quite upsetting. And it's a weird point of society, I think, that's a problem, is that we're really obsessed with what people do for a living. It's not what they do for fun or what they enjoy to do, it's what they do to get paid. So I think companies really need to realise that actually it's not logistically that much harder to hire disabled people. If you've got your ramp and your lift, because that's your sort of, that's where you decided you're being inclusive, it's not much harder to jump on from there and just make more of an effort to hire people with invisible disabilities. Because if you've got your ramp and your lift, the disabled person can get in and out your building. There's no reason they can't then do work whilst they're there. It's not, and if we can have maternity leave and other such things for mothers, there's no reason we can't do similar things and do part-time working and home working for disabled people. We shouldn't have to put it into separate little groups. Some people get this, but these people, they don't get it because they're too awkward.
Yeah, thanks very much. I agree. It's very frustrating because I think anyone who's been through a disability, I would expect sees that same thing about you learn, you become, as you think, I think you said earlier, you gain skills you didn't have before.
Yeah.
But it's almost like you need to get to the executives and get them some personal exposure to somebody with a disability before they actually, the light goes on.
Definitely. I think it's it's frustrating because there's this assumption that I've experienced a lot in the able-bodied community, is that now that I'm disabled, I just don't have as much worth. I'm just not as worthy a person. And in a lot of ways, I think I'm a lot better now that I have a disability. I'm a lot more fun, for a start. I can make great jokes about my trauma. I'm very good at that. And I spend so much time baking that I can basically enter Bake Off at this point. So really, I think I'm a lot better than I was before I was disabled. So I just wish people would make the effort to understand that and not immediately put up a barrier in the way of people with disabilities.
Yes, Susan, thank you so much for that comment and question. I think, Eloise, you answered it pretty well. I think it's important as even me coming from a HR background, it's important to have an idea of understanding that people are people first, that it's not just about their job or their disability, that you need to understand them as a person. So I think that really came across in what you just said. And just a comment from Marie here that I'm sure you'll be glad to hear. Louise, we value you highly at Speak Out Revolution. You're amazing.
Thank you.
And also I appreciate being valued highly. Okay, so does anybody else have any other comments or remarks that they wish to share before we start rounding up the call and I tell you a bit more about Speak Out?
It's Susan. I was just going to make a point, something that Manish, if I pronounced that correctly, I apologize, mentioned, because I think it was really true. At one point, I am retired now, but I used to work in Canary Wharf in the financial area. And I remember saying in a meeting once that area of the financial sector should be over-hiring people with disabilities, at least physical disabilities, at least, because it's one of the few areas of London where it's easy to get to work. Yeah. Now, this is pre-COVID, but still, and the shocked looks on people's faces when there was this expectation, when I said, how about that for a paradigm shift? You guys should be hiring more than your fair share because people can get to the office here. So it's interesting, the challenges that we still face.
Yeah, it's really disappointing and upsetting and deeply frustrating as a disabled person that there's this sort of there's so many of us, there's so many disabled people and people with chronic illnesses in the UK and across the world in general, and we deserve jobs and are capable of working just as much as able-bodied people. But there's this kind of assumption that you shouldn't hire us, and if you do hire us, it's a token kind of gesture. But because for me, seeing people who have disabilities employed with meaningful jobs that they really enjoy and they excel at, that's really inspiring to me. That shows me that I can do similar things, that I'm not held back by my disability. And I think it's really important that we do that in our workplaces, similarly to how the media is portraying more sort of fame individuals and curvier bodies and all sorts, because it makes it young women and young men just feel better. We also need it for disabled people in the media and in the workplace, because it makes us know that, we actually have that chance. Otherwise, we're put off right at the very beginning because we just don't have any representation.
Yeah, representation is important in all spheres. It's important and I think organizations, they've seen in many reports and in many surveys that they conduct themselves that the more diverse their workforce is, the more productive people will be, the better ideas they can come up with, the better products they can come up with. So it really does feed into the things that you said, that it really backs up all of those points.
I think we've got a question from Shana.
Shana, would you like to
Hi.
Speak up on your comments?
Hi there. Ellen, thank you so much for this. It's been really, really great to hear from you. I'm writing a blog for International Person of Disabilities Week next week. I have two neurodivergent. Well, I have I'm dyspraxic, so there's that challenge. Recently diagnosed with ADHD.
And that too.
Oh goodness, okay. Recently diagnosed with ADHD, and then went through a really traumatic experience with severe endometriosis over the last couple of years. So I've experienced the whole fatigue side of things. Yeah. So really resonated what you were talking about. But what I found is the barrier to career progression. I've been in a workplace that talks about being really diverse, and I've been working with them to help increase the way we respond and deal with invisible disabilities, but there's still very much some kind of glass ceiling with career progression.
Oh, yeah.
And it comes back again to what you were saying about the assumption. So yeah, any thoughts on that would be most welcome.
I think it's, for me personally, it's definitely what I already said about it's the quality of your work that you produce. It's not the quantity of it. I could put in 4 hours really good work and produce something just as good as somebody who put in 8 hours of work. And if I put in 8 hours of work, I'd probably be knackered and I'd be probably off work for the next 3 days if I put in that solid. So I think it's really important that we actually focus on what you can produce something just as good, even if you are working at home or you're not doing as many hours. Because we cut people off immediately. Sort of, like you said, it is like a disability glass ceiling. It's kind of like, well, I'm not going to get any further than here because they want me to do this role in the office this many days a week, and then they don't like it when I do this now, so they're really not going to like it when I do this when I'm higher up, and they get funny about sickness, and it's a real problem. And I think, as you probably know, with fatigue, one of the things that really frustrates me is people assuming fatigue is the same as just being a bit tired, and they're like, have a nap. I'm like, not the same. It's not going to work. If I tell you I'm really fatigued and I would like to work at home, it doesn't mean I can have a nap and come back to the office. It means I am bone and body tired and I can't do a lot, but I can do something if you let me go home rather than if you make me stay in the office, in which case I'm probably going to be off sick for another 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanna, for that. Okay, we have about 12 more minutes left on the call. So I can see some more comments coming in now. So I'll just go through those quickly as well.
Popular, it's great. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. I'm glad to be seeing all the comments. Okay, yeah, so there's another one from Manash about, I wonder whether change to increase flexible working due to COVID-19 may help.
That's what I'm personally really hoping, because that's one of the things it's really frustrated me. I know it's really frustrated a lot of other people in the disabled and chronic illness community, is that they've been asking for flexible working, remote working for years. And we've always been told, no, it's too hard, not worth it, not worth the effort, too difficult. And now because of COVID-19, it is very possible. And lots of workplaces are going to go to flexible and remote working permanently. So there's no reason you can't then hire more disabled people, because they've been asking for that for years. So touch wood, I'm very hopeful. I'm not going to hold my breath too much, but I'm very hopeful it does change and it makes a difference, and there is more flexible working, remote working available for people now.
Yeah, I think COVID-19 has brought about a lot of conversations that maybe would have been left on the back bench for a long time to come. I can also see a comment here from Jasai. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He says that he works in the 19 years that he's been working in engineering for consultancies. And back to what we've been saying about the job descriptions and job adverts, that he's seeing that we seem to just be regurgitating the same ones rather than making amendments, and they may be making amendments last minute or just completely making use of the old ones.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think needs to be looked at by organizations. That are they actually looking at the job as it is, and when they see somebody that they feel that, okay, if this person does have a disability, whether it's visible or invisible, that can they adjust the job for the person or make a few tweaks here and there?
Yeah, because it's generally eminently possible. Very often it's small. It's not like you'd have to completely change the job and let someone work on the moon. It's not necessarily huge things. And I really see that with job adverts. And it's frustrating because it's like, I write a new cover letter every time I apply for a job. I don't write the same cover letter, it's a different one. So why use exactly the same job application you use for every single job role ever? Just change it, write a new one.
Yes, I personally feel that way as well, because it doesn't take so long to reassess and make changes whenever you need to see fit, as I said, from a HR background. So it's something that I'm personally going to take on board as well. Okay, so on this note, we have about 10 minutes left, so I would just like to close the call. I want to thank you all for attending and making this very interactive, asking very thought-provoking questions of Eloise. You really made her think.
Yeah,
for a very long time.
Guys, thanks.
Yeah. So this call has been recorded, so it will be shared so you can listen to it again. I would like to remind you all that if you haven't already been aware, I'm sure you are, since most of you are following us on LinkedIn, that we are running a Speak Out survey. And we want to collect people's incidents and we want them to speak out and disclose things that have happened to them in the workplace so that we can drive changes. So we would like you to take the Speak Out survey if you fit into this category, or share it with others, even if you don't know people, because they may not have been speaking about the issues that they've had. You should just share it amongst your networks anyway, because you don't know what people are experiencing. As Eloise said, in relation to people that have the invisible disability, you shouldn't make assumptions. So in terms of people that may be experiencing bullying and harassment, you shouldn't make assumptions that, or just because somebody hasn't been speaking out about what they've experienced, it doesn't mean that they're not experiencing it. So please share our survey amongst your networks. So you are aware, we've had over 110 responses so far across various sectors. From the results that we've had so far, I can tell you that the most prevalent forms of bullying are microaggressions, gaslighting, and repeated and openly discussing, discounting people's contributions. And also an interesting thing that popped out, because I know mental health has been touched on a little bit in this conversation about how people can be affected when they're dealing with an invisible disability. The survey response so far showed that 90% of people saw a negative impact to their mental health in relation to the harassment or reporting the process. That this harassment and the experience, it impacted them beyond the incident of actually being harassed. So they ended up seeking professional support for anxiety, depression, low confidence, and some individuals were unable to really work going forward based on their experience. So that's just food for thought for some things that have come out from our survey. So we can see that mental health does have a huge part to play in relation to how people deal with, to how people maybe will be impacted in terms of bullying and harassment. Oh, and I would like to share with you our new dashboard, which you can see on www.speakoutrevolution.co.uk. Please go to our website to see our dashboard, which is very interactive. You can see the survey responses that we've had per region. And it's a very colorful map of the UK now. And hopefully it will get, all regions will be filled out as we collect information. And we'll be able to build upon it to share more data as we get along with, as we move forward with the survey. Once again, I would like to thank you all for taking part. And thank you, Eloise, again, for all your contribution. And on that note, I would like to end this talk. If you have any further remarks for me or Eloise or for Speak Out Revolution, please feel free to contact any of the team on any of our social media platforms or on our or via our websites. But thank you all for your time, and I wish you a very good day.